beginning our discussions of the event were simple. Provide a profile of what youth leadership meant in relation to the implementation of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches for adaptation. It's important to note that since the term nature-based solutions rose to prominence in 2019, we noticed it was being co-opted by bad faith actors who were using and continue to use the term to pass off actions that do not integrate justice, biodiversity science, or traditional knowledge as climate solutions. Youth for Nature's current understanding of the nature-based solutions is, for many at the front lines and on the grassroots, synonymous with actions we stand firmly against: the loss of land rights for Indigenous and local communities, climate delayism, and the continued exploitation of people, lands, and waters by fossil fuels and the people who profit from them. As the term continues to be discussed, we hope a clearer understanding will help governments, corporations, and organizations to use this term for the betterment of our world. Our event today will clarify some misunderstandings, but also showcase the different perspectives of youth towards this term and its common usages. Our event today has 4 live panels on nature-based solutions from across the world. Additionally, the land acknowledgement, we will hear after the land acknowledgement, we will hear a pre-recorded message from the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson. After our senior panel, we will start the live sessions. After that, we will start the live sessions off with our senior panel. We'll hear from 5 leading experts in the field who will provide the base knowledge on nature-based solutions from the viewpoint of an academic, non-governmental organization, Indigenous people, and public and private sectors. Afterwards, we will take a 10-minute wellness break, at which point we will have some optional questions for you to answer. Coming back from the break, our youth panel will critically discuss nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches for adaptation. The outcomes and messages of this discussion in particular will be shared later this month at the Climate Adaptation Summit. After that discussion, 2 storytellers from each host network will share how they have successfully implemented nature-based solutions in their communities. Lastly, to wrap it all up, our closing panel will consist of 2 representatives of the Nature-Based Solutions Action Track who will share the key messages with another member of the team and that stood up for them and reflect on all they heard and provide some information to upcoming events for further engagement on this topic. For the land acknowledgement today, we're doing it a little bit differently than other events, both in the action track and in general. And as an Anishinaabe youth who has been privileged to attend many events, conferences, and meetings where land acknowledgements have been performed, I often would get frustrated when these would occur. Especially in international events or meetings where land acknowledgements are not as widely known or understood, there is always a disconnection between what the land acknowledgement was directly talking about and how it related to the event or organization. Thus, when I'm involved with an organization and their events, I like to take the time to educate during the land acknowledgement while giving one myself. To me, land acknowledgements have long been done even before they became popular in 2016. The very act stems from the opening prayer and thanks elders would give before an event, ceremony, or community feast to thank their ancestors for all they have done to ensure our survival today, all the current leaders who continue to fight for our rights, and those who will come after us and inherit Mother Earth from us. So as I give the land acknowledgement today, 3 AHA slides will be shared so you can start to think critically about your relationship to the land. For the AHA slides, you will need to copy the code in the chat or on the screen and put the link in your browser. The link is ahaslides.com/youthnbs, and that is what you'll be using. To begin the land acknowledgement, our first question is centered around your current capacity as you join us today. This question will help us get into the right mindset as we think about our relationship to the land we are currently on, but also those we come from. I like to do this by reminding myself where I come from. As I said, I'm an Anishinaabe youth from Bigdagong, Nishnabeg, but I also have ancestors in Polish, Ukrainian, and Dene roots. I'd like to say miigwech to all of you for joining me today, as I am joining the call physically from the Algonquin Anishinaabe lands that have never been ceded or surrendered, but what most people refer to and is currently known as Ottawa, Canada. These lands were historically the meeting place for the communities who make up the Algonquin Anishinaabe and still acts as this today, this meeting place. Due to the colonization of Canada, however, it is run by the Canadian government and the city of Ottawa, who live on these lands and utilize it to meet with leaders from across the nation and across the world to discuss what Canadians need. These nations who make up the Anishinaabe Algonquin haven't left and are still as vibrant as they were before colonization, if only while being restricted by colonial systems. Thank you for everyone who is providing some insight to their questions. I'm going to move on to the next one. So for the second question, think about your connection to the land you're on, just like I did. As a visitor to these lands, I would also like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who call these lands I'm on home. For many reasons, Indigenous people from across the country and world also call Ottawa home, and these individuals continue to ensure our rights are upheld as they work or volunteer for the betterment of the communities. Due to the pandemic, our event is being hosted online, which, while this allows for attendance worldwide and an increased accessibility to discussions like this, the strain of going through an event like this, the pandemic, on many people is hard. To our frontline workers, I would like to thank you for ensuring our health and well-being to the best of your abilities. To the individuals who abide by local advisories, thank you for taking care of the community and those who are at high risk. Our word cloud, it looks like, is coming along nicely, and I'm really happy to see everyone thinking critically. Moving on to our last question. This question is to think about who the traditional protectors of the lands you are on. There are many resources available online to check out the original protectors of the land you are on, but a favorite of mine is nativeland.ca. If your region is not included on this resource though, take the time to research this and reflect on all three questions asked here. In thinking of the traditional protectors, it is also important to note that Indigenous people worldwide have long protected the lands they inhabit and have been stewards for it since time immemorial. Their knowledge and insights can and have provided us with innovative solutions to climate change, which always incorporates nature. To put this into numbers, a study in 2018 found out that while Indigenous people worldwide make up only 5% of the world's global population, we protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. These leaders are the reason I became involved in climate action and are what led me to being here today. So at this time, I would like to acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, the information and knowledge we benefit from them, the paths they have paved for us to be here, their language that is being reclaimed, what has been done to them, what is being done to their descendants, and the resilience they continue to have in all of this. As a guest to the lands that I'm on today, I need to acknowledge my responsibility as well, my responsibility to teach truth of the history of the land and then reconciles with my actions today and every day hereafter. My responsibility to pursue and continue this work and consider this in the work we are about to do today in the coming months and as I move forward in my everyday life. When you're reflecting on these three questions during the discussions being held today, remember that our actions are felt by Mother Earth, and for our continued survival, we need to think critically about everything we do. Providing a land acknowledgement should not be simply about whose land you're on, but how you benefit from them, how you respect it, and the current realities of the original protectors of it. As a representative of Youth for Nature, especially at the North American region, I have made it my priority to connect with and try to understand the stories of the Indigenous people across the region to ensure programming is reflective not only of myself, but of the beautiful, talented, and continually growing population of all Indigenous people of these lands. I ask that wherever you are joining us today to also make it a priority for yourself to uphold these rights of the Indigenous peoples as they work continually to make the world better for us all. Finally, to close the land acknowledgement, I would like to invite all of our speakers and facilitators today to share where they're joining us from. And without further ado, here is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson's pre-recorded video.
Good Good morning. I am delighted to have this opportunity to share a few words with you today. I first want to acknowledge that the land from which I am joining you is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I would also like to thank Youth for Nature and the Global Youth Biodiversity Network Mexico chapter for organizing this event as part of the Nature-Based Solutions Action Track of the Global Commission on Adaptation. As you know, and certainly as my two daughters remind me regularly, engaging youth in the decisions and actions we take that affect your future is crucial. Assuring your future depends on a rapid reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change, but it also depends on concerted action to adapt to the impacts of climate change that are already taking place. That is why the Climate Adaptation Summit on January 25th and 26th is so very important. As we approach this existential crisis, we must recognize that our fortunes and our future are inextricably tied to the health of our natural world. We must learn how to coexist alongside nature. For too long, we have been working against, not with nature. Nature has been under siege, not just from human activity, but also from climate change. We have to act to protect and restore natural areas, and as we do so, we must also recognize that nature can be our greatest ally in building resilience to climate change. Nature gives vital and irreplaceable protection against the mounting impacts of climate change, whether it is in the cooling effects of urban forests or the protection of coastlines provided by salt marshes or mangroves, or offsetting flooding through the restoration of wetlands. The potential of natural solutions to tackle adaptation to climate change is tremendous, and yet we've barely scratched the surface of what is possible. That is why Canada is co-leading with Mexico the Nature-Based Solutions Action Track for the Global Commission on Adaptation to accelerate the uptake of nature-based solutions around the world. And one of the principal objectives to achieving this goal is profiling leadership in nature-based solutions for adaptation. This includes leadership among youth, like you, because enabling youth leadership and engaging with youth is critical to scaling up and reaching the full potential of nature-based solutions. We need your ambition, your ideas, and your engagement in the design and implementation of nature-based solutions. That is why the Government of Canada is striving to support youth like you to create meaningful opportunities for your voices to be heard and to give you the tools you need to create your own climate projects. For example, we are working with the Global Centre on Adaptation to support the 2020 Young Adaptation Professionals Program, which brings together young professionals from around the world to develop solutions for and advance adaptation. I am pleased to see that fellows from this program are leading on the creation of a youth adaptation network and the development of a youth call for action to be launched at the Climate Adaptation Summit. Today's event will profile youth perspectives on scaling up nature-based solutions for climate adaptation and biodiversity goals. These perspectives will inspire world leaders and decision makers at the Climate Adaptation Summit to develop climate solutions with youth. I am certainly looking forward to hearing the key messages that you will develop today and to seeing those messages conveyed in the summit and beyond. Your input is valued by me, by my government, and by colleagues engaged in this work around the world. Thank you very much for your efforts, and I certainly look forward to hearing the results.
So hello, everyone. We would like to thank Honorable Minister Wilkinson for his opening remarks. And thank you very much, Sarah, for your beautiful, beautiful words of welcome and for setting the stage for a great conversation today. So hola a todos, bonjour a tous, and hello, everyone. Si te recién te integras, te recordamos que hay interpretación en español. Si vous voulez si vous nous rejoignez maintenant, on vous rappelle qu'il y a de l'interprétation en français et vous pouvez la retrouver ci-dessous. So I'm just reminding everyone that we have interpretation and you can find it at the bottom of the bar there. It is my pleasure to welcome you all for the senior panel and about scaling up nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches to adaptation. My name is Caroline Mirna and I'm the Engagement Director at Youth for Nature. And I will be hosting this session to get to hear perspectives from various sectors, including academic, NGO, Indigenous peoples, public and private sectors, and to build a common understanding about what nature-based solutions are, how they can be scaled up, and what are some opportunities and challenges in their implementation. And so as you can see here, we have our senior panelists listed for you. And I'd like to give a little introduction to each one in order here. First, starting with Alexander Chosson, who is a senior researcher at the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative at Oxford University. He's been conducting and applying social and ecological research over the past 7 years in conservation science and now in nature-based solutions. In September 2020, one of the reasons why we chose him as a panelist is because he was a lead author of a new report called Mapping the Effectiveness of Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Change Adaptation. And he's interested in the interdisciplinary nexus between biodiversity, development, and climate change. And he focuses on building capacity for individual and organization level transformational change towards an equitable world for people and nature. So looking forward to hearing from him. Then we have Dr. Doreen Stabinski, a professor at the Global Environmental Politics at the College of the Atlantic, based in the US. And her work lies at the intersection of land, food, and climate change, and also at the intersections of carbon markets, net zero, and nature-based solutions. She advises governments and NGOs at negotiations under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. And she's also a contributing author for the 6th assessment report for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, currently in development. Then we now have Minnie Dagawan, who's joining us as an Indigenous person. She reminded me in our briefing that foremost as an Indigenous person and then as a director for the Indigenous Peoples Program at Conservation International. Minnie is Kakawani and Igorot from the Cordillera in the Philippines. And she became involved in the Indigenous Peoples movement at a young age, and now as Secretary General for the Cordillera Peoples Alliance, and representing in important international meetings such as drafting the UN Declaration for Indigenous Peoples. We're very lucky to have her join us, and she did include in her bio that she also hopes to return to the Cordillera soon to reclaim land and indigenous traditions. Then we have Rosa Morales, who is the General Director for Climate Change and Desertification for the Ministry of Environment of Peru. For more than 20 years, she has been working in climate change management, natural resources and climate financing, and nature-based solutions. She's a professor as well, on top of it all, working in the Department of Economics at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru. And she's an advisor to the Vice Minister Office on Strategic Development for Natural Resources within the Ministry of Environment in Peru. Then we have Ers Dietrich, who is the Land Use Fund Manager at South Pole. And he aims to mainstream investments for sustainable land use strategies, building on his background in finance, carbon markets, forestry, development, public policy. He holds a master's in environmental management from Yale and a Bachelor of Science in forestry science and resource management. And by mobilizing private capital for conservation, Ers has experience in working with big corporate clients, with investors, with intergovernmental institutions and community-based organizations. So we are so lucky to have these folks join us here today. And I'm just going to remind all panelists, I don't know if I've done the best myself, but to try to speak slowly so that our interpreters can capture your every word and can make them accessible in both Spanish and French and English. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our first panelist and who will be answering the question, what are and what are not nature-based solutions? So I would love to call on you, Alexander Chosson, if possible. And I'll turn myself off mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much can you hear me well?
Yes,
so thank you to Youth for Nature for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm based in Oxford, but I'm French and American. And I work at the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative. at the University of Oxford. And even though we're based in an academic institution, we work a lot with partners outside of academia. So, and we focus on nature-based solutions, particularly for climate change adaptation. So what are or what are not nature-based solutions? So the place to start is that the concept is rooted in the understanding that human societies rely on nature and are embedded in the biosphere, and that biodiversity loss and climate change are intertwined crises. So land use change driven by growth-based economies is the biggest driver of biodiversity decline and the second biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And so the nature-based solutions concept encompasses actions that seek to sustain or promote biodiversity to address challenges at this nexus. This includes climate change, adaptation and mitigation, but also sustainable food production or disaster risk reduction. So these actions can be categorized as protecting, restoring, creating ecosystems, or sustainably managing landscapes or seascapes. So it's a broad set of actions, like, for example, forest landscape restoration, agroforestry, salt marsh restoration, watershed management, and so forth. And the important point is that the concept recognizes that these actions can deliver many outcomes. And biodiversity and functioning ecological systems really underpin the effectiveness and the resilience of these solutions to deliver benefits in the future. So, actions that are harmful to biodiversity are not nature-based solutions, and many simplistic tree planting schemes simply are not nature-based solutions in that sense. And they also often entail significant social costs. But the thing I wanted to emphasize today is that the concept reflects a particular way of framing our relationship with the natural world. So rather than nature working for people, it's about people and nature working together. And this aligns with our understanding that what we call ecosystem services are actually, we would say, co-produced by people and nature. And it's important to emphasize that even though they're called nature-based, these actions are defined by people and activated by people with nature. So around that notion is that the key point is that for an action to be a solution, it needs buy-in. And because there are actions that are very much place-based in particular contexts and landscapes, local actors need to feel like they own the solution. So it's about tapping into their values and their aspirations. So even though we can set broad boundaries around what nature-based solutions are, it needs to address a societal challenge. It should sustain or promote biodiversity. Ultimately, the right solution very much depends upon the contextual realities that local stakeholders face. And what are their perspectives? And the key thing is that this is not only an ethical imperative, it's very much a pragmatic one. It makes economic sense. People activate processes that really matter for delivering effective and resilient solutions. So in conclusion, what I'll just say is that people-led nature-based solutions produce effective solutions, which deliver benefits. So I hope this sets the scene, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alexander, and perfect timing with your 5 minutes. And so I will now ask Alexander, if it's possible to turn off your video. I see that Doreen already has joined us, which is wonderful. And that on that definition that centers human well-being and is defined or activated by people, this is a great segue for us to ask you the next question, Doreen, as I know your work centers on climate justice. So which are its intersections of nature-based solutions and its differences with ecosystem-based approaches? And we'd love to hear from you on your thoughts on this question. Thanks. Doreen, we can't quite hear you, I think. If you don't mind just checking if your mic is on, and then I'll also use this opportunity to remind people that to think of your questions as well. If you can, we will be encouraging people to shift from the chat onto the Q&A so that we can save your good questions for the end after panelists have spoken. So Doreen, just checking in with you if you want to turn on your video and your mic.
Is the mic working now?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect.
Excellent. Sometimes I just need to unplug it and plug it back in again. Never know when that's going to be needed.
No.
Yeah, so thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really quite happy to be here and be part of this conversation. And you know, what a very interesting question that you've posed for me, which is the interconnections and differences between nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. Because I don't actually think that there's a material difference, right? I think that ecosystem-based approaches have now been sort of moved under, ecosystem-based approaches to adaptation have been moved under this broader term of nature-based solutions. And that leads us to ask the question, well, for one, why is this even a question, and why has that been done, right? What's the utility of changing in the political conversation at the international level from a term that is widely adopted, used within the UNFCCC space, and used in the CBD space, the Convention on Biological Diversity space? Why, you know, whether it's ecosystem approach, ecosystem-based adaptation, if you have an agreed term, why would you want to change it? And I think we have to ask that question. I mean, one of the reasons why we have to ask that question is that because that terms, you know, meaningful definitions and meaningful terms are very important in the policy space. A term with more concreteness has more policy utility. So, you know, when you're talking about, you're asking questions of what, you know, you're a regulator, you're somebody in government, you ask this question of, what do I need to provide finance for? What sorts of regulations and guidance do I need to provide incentives for, let's say, flood management or urban forestry, right? The more clarity and precision that you have as a policymaker, it's a lot easier to have those conversations. But a vaguer term like nature-based solutions has much more political utility, right? And I'm contrasting here policy with politics, because a vaguer term can obscure where money is going to, right? It allows the obscuring of where money is actually going to. And at the same time, you can sort of package, and Alexandra mentioned this a bit, you can package lots of things in a very nice term of nature-based solutions. Some of those things are actually quite nice, and some of those things might not be so nice at all, right? And so that vague term can obscure what's actually in the package. The term nature-based solutions, and I think this is another aspect of the term that really needs a bit more attention, and that is this word solutions, right? Because it begs the question of solutions to what? Nature-based solutions for adaptation, then adaptation becomes the problem. and nature is the solution. But and in doing so, it actually it doesn't allow us the space by moving us towards that solutions conversation. It doesn't allow us the space to ask the prior question, right? Which is, why do we have to adapt? Well, we have to adapt because we keep burning fossil fuels, right? The solution to adaptation is to stop burning fossil fuels. And so this term, nature-based solutions, distracts attention from fossil fuels to convince us that we need nature to soak up fossil emissions, nature to help us adapt, keeping us from focusing on the root causes, right? We look at the Band-Aid and not the real problem. And so my final point, I see that I've got a minute left. My final point, that some indication of how politically useful this term is for obscuring and for deflecting our attention is who's championing the term. And Alexander also alluded to this, right? Yes, IUCN, but the fossil fuel industry has grabbed this term. Shell has a nature-based solutions initiative. Total has a nature-based solutions initiative, right? So I think my final message is don't underestimate the political utility of the term nature-based solutions for those actors that would like to obscure, to keep the focus on ecosystem-based adaptation and keep us from asking the question of what do we need to do to not have to adapt. And, you know, my final political point, in the context of the UNFCCC and the CBD, let's keep using the term that's already there, which is ecosystem-based approaches or ecosystem-based adaptation. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Doreen, and for encouraging that nuanced perspective. We'll have an opportunity for panelists to discuss as well after their 5-minute remarks. But I'll hand this over now to Minnie. On that concept of nature-based solutions, how can we ensure equity and right safeguards are ensured?
Right. Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting and important event. Before I go on to answering that interesting question, I just wanted to further the introduction that I am Nini Degawan, a Kankanaey Igorot from the Cordillera, Philippines, and currently residing on the traditional lands of the Pescaway people here in Maryland. And I acknowledge the work that they have done and continue to do to keep this place livable. And I am working with Conservation International as head of its Indigenous Peoples Program. And to answer that question, let me share how my people view nature. Nature for us is not merely an object or a vague concept. It is part of our being. It is a relative of ours. It's the source of our identity and our sustenance. And we do not discriminate whether it's the big towering trees in the forests or the small fragile weeds in the Sweden farms. Each and everything around us is considered to be part of nature. The rocks, the rivers that surround us, and even the unseen, such as the wind. And yes, the spirits of our ancestors. And a very basic thing inculcated in our minds when we were young is that we do not set out to conquer nature. We are brought up to maintain the balance between nature and the community and the balance with our relations among humans. And so when nature-based solutions are being heralded as the innovative solution to the world's problems of biodiversity loss and climate change, I cannot help but feel concerned. Remember that nature-based solutions has to happen elsewhere. These do not happen in a vacuum, nor do they happen in Montreal or Geneva or Gland. These solutions are being targeted to happen in the territories of Indigenous peoples, simply because it is there where nature remains unspoiled to a certain degree. So once again, despite us being the least contributors to biodiversity loss, we are again being asked to sacrifice for the greater good. And while I do not oppose the efforts to reverse the trend of destroying nature for profit, I am very worried when such solutions do not include the views of those who live closest to nature. So first, the process must be inclusive, meaning the people living in the territories targeted for NBS should be part of the planning, the design, the implementation, and monitoring of such projects. An important component for NBS to be truly innovative is to move away from looking at indigenous peoples as merely beneficiaries of such interventions. The right to free prior informed consent must be exercised, not just as a process, but should result in a negotiated, equitable benefit sharing agreement. Second, we must look at what is the objective of these NBS projects. As I said earlier, we do not seek to conquer, we seek to balance. And this should be the intent of any intervention. We know that so much destruction has happened already to the natural world, and we should be aiming for healing. But such will not happen when we are conserving one area, no matter how good the process is, or no matter how good the safeguards are, if in another area we continue with our destructive, exploitative ways. So NBS should not become a greenwashing initiative for companies or organizations that will support community projects in one area and use this as a pass to continue to exploit in another region. Such will not lead to a balance in the natural world. It is important that there is sincerity in the purpose of NBS, and that is to heal that what we have destroyed and to restore balance. So for NBS to be truly innovative and for it to be successful, we have to address the reasons why we are in the situation we are in now. When the rights of indigenous peoples to our lands, territories, and resources are fully recognized, when we can practice and sustain our traditional knowledge systems, and we are able to pass this on to the youth, when we are truly self-determining, and when society as a whole can curb its greed, then and only then will NBS be a viable solution. Iswis and was dinding manlamlamin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minnie, for your powerful remarks. I think those are very heartfelt, and your words will stay with us. I really appreciate specifically the quote, "We do not seek to conquer, but to seek to balance nature." Beautiful words. And I will now invite Director Rosa Morales and ask the question in Spanish. Mi pregunta para usted es, ¿cuáles son los posibles efectos de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y cómo las evaluamos?
Bueno, muchas gracias. En realidad, bueno, había preparado mi presentación en inglés. No sé si puedo preguntar cuánta población, cómo está la distribución del público, pero entonces quizás si me pueden dar ese dato por el chat, se los agradecería.
Sí, tenemos 5 minutos.
Ok. No, me refería a las personas, pero bueno. Bueno, yo estoy volviendo desde hace un tiempo al sector público. Yo estuve en el sector público, regresé a la academia, mucho antes estuve en la academia, entonces he tenido esta oportunidad de moverme entre estos dos mundos. Y de hecho, quiero reconocer el trabajo que hace la Universidad de Oxford en los temas de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Tuve la oportunidad de poder trabajar con ellos también por un breve tiempo. Yo quisiera responder a la pregunta tomando precisamente el punto que mencionó nuestro primer expositor. Él mencionó esta relación entre la naturaleza y las personas, ¿no? Que son esta simbiosis, es la que nos trae precisamente las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y los servicios de los ecosistemas que nos ayudan a resolver los problemas que tenemos, y entre ellos, por supuesto, está el de la adaptación al cambio climático. Y allí voy a responder la pregunta que tiene que ver, y aquí quisiera resaltar esta relación cambio climático, soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, y que se relacionan mucho, por ejemplo, con cómo las personas pueden las soluciones a la naturaleza. Y luego hay un nuevo concepto que es el de Climate Adaptation Services, que también está muy vinculado. Yo no voy a entrar a la discusión de los términos, pero sí quiero decir que es muy importante desde el punto de vista de cambio climático cómo logramos que las soluciones que podamos tener para afrontarnos a los impactos adversos del cambio climático puedan ser sostenibles en el tiempo. Y una de las cosas que he aprendido en este último año es que para que estas potenciales soluciones sean permanentes en el tiempo, las personas, las comunidades tienen que asumirlas, tienen que ser parte de sus propias decisiones, ¿no? La intervención anterior tiene que ver mucho con esto, cómo logramos que las poblaciones efectivamente digan, bueno, sí, esto es algo que yo quiero para mi vida, para mi futuro. No voy a entrar a la discusión de los temas de mitigación y todo lo que tenemos que hacer para no estar en estos problemas, y también concurro con esa visión. Y yo quisiera, a partir de este potencial que tienen las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, remitirme al vínculo con la política pública, el que ha sido aludido también a lo largo de estas intervenciones. Y allí tratar de responder el tema de cómo las medimos, ¿no? El ejemplo del Perú, o la experiencia del Perú, nosotros hemos estado trabajando durante mucho tiempo para tener nuestro Plan Nacional de Adaptación y nuestras contribuciones nacionalmente determinadas, ¿no? Estas metas, objetivos que tienen los países en el marco de la Convención de Cambio Climático. Y hemos hecho este vínculo entre cuáles de esas medidas de cambio climático se basan en los ecosistemas. Pero además, por otro lado, hemos estado también procurando, porque además el propio Acuerdo de París lo pide, tener una idea muy clara de cuál es la métrica, cuáles van a ser las métricas, de qué manera vamos a poder reportar los avances, lo que se hace y los avances y los resultados, por supuesto. Y esto es algo que también he visto muy presente y muy claro en todo el debate, toda la discusión y la literatura sobre soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, en donde la medición y la evidencia es fundamental. Como país en desarrollo, nosotros estamos empezando a tener estas formulaciones. Tenemos una ley de cambio climático que nos manda a hacer estas mediciones, pero sin embargo yo quisiera dejar también el reto que significa esto a países que no tenemos sistemas de información tan fuertes y sólidos, y entonces ese es un camino que todavía tenemos que recorrer. Y quisiera terminar solamente con una reflexión sobre el rol de los jóvenes, dado que nos convoca aquí ese colectivo. Y en ese sentido, comentar que nosotros tenemos una institucionalidad que está procurando que haya una representación de distintos actores sociales, entre ellos los jóvenes, que en el Perú son bastante activos y que a través de espacios nacionales y regionales estamos procurando su participación. En el último año hemos tenido reuniones en las que han podido participar alrededor de 600 jóvenes, pero más allá de eso quisiera resaltar el rol de los jóvenes para lograr que estas iniciativas o estas soluciones, estas acciones de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza puedan ser sostenibles en el tiempo, ¿no? Al elemento que mencioné antes, de que la población pueda hacer suyas estas soluciones y que salgan de ellos mismos, por supuesto, se suma la visión de los jóvenes. he tenido la oportunidad de ser mentora en un programa en el que una joven peruana trabajando con una comunidad en los Andes del Perú, bueno, cerca de Lima, pero ya en las zonas altas, está queriendo involucrar a un colectivo de jóvenes de esa comunidad para producir, para generar proyectos de infraestructura natural relacionados a agua. Y entonces la idea es que a partir de ese colectivo de jóvenes, de esa comunidad, se pueda tener un trabajo para el futuro de la propia comunidad. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Rosa. And so I am now going to pass on the speaking opportunity to our last panelist, who is Ers. And we have an important transition question to ask you about the opportunities and barriers for climate financing for nature-based solutions. And so you have 5 minutes, and I'll pass it over to you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I used to be an active member of the International Forestry Students Association and always promoting youth engagement. And it's really funny actually that I'm now on the side of actually also speaking to a lot of youth around the world, which I'm very, very happy about. So Minnie and also Rosa actually talked a lot about equitable benefit sharing and land recognition, social justice, and that's the centerpiece of everything that we have to talk about, right? Like just mere investment without attempting to address broader societal issues is ill-conceived. And I hope to now outline a few barriers that investors find, that governments find, and also private investors find when trying to finance nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. So let's talk just in general. We still fail to grasp what we already know, right? The invaluable value of nature to the global economy. And our economic and political system values what is easy to measure, but not what's important to our long-term thriving. And nature-based solutions can contribute 37% of all cost-effective climate change mitigation, yet we are a far away from where we need to be. However, there are some challenges when it comes to nature-based solutions. Like, for example, cash flows from a nature-based solutions project, like a forestry project, for example, forest landscape restoration, they're often delayed while significant upfront investment is required directly at the start. So this brings a lot of risks for investors. And in addition to that, the biggest opportunities and investment needs as well are in developing countries where often macroeconomic and political risks and also the involvement of many, many stakeholders may deter investors from engaging, among others also because of reputational risks, but also everything else that surrounds currency, macroeconomy. And then another point is also often a small deal size. We have very, very many wonderful, small, charismatic projects that are rather small, and often institutional investors, for example, they require larger deal sizes, and therefore there's a mismatch. And then, of course, there's also uncertainty about the positive impacts generated by nature-based solutions and how they're measured. We do not yet have a clear standard worldwide, and a lot of stakeholders are talking to each other to try to define how we can actually create transparency around it, but we're not there yet. Then we also know we have a tremendous amount of agricultural subsidies that are harmful to the environment. If you combine agricultural, forestry, and fisheries subsidies that are adverse to the environment, that's more than $500 billion US. And that's really something we need to tackle. And the financial sector also really fails to adequately capture nature-related risks associated with investments in infrastructure and energy, in extractives, and in transportation. So we really need to reform two things. It's massively reduce harmful subsidies, and then to improve investment risk management practices by the financial sector. If we don't tackle these two, then no matter how much good we do, we will still fall short of our big, big goals. So at the end, let me switch gears a little bit. because I'm also currently working on developing a landscape resilience fund to also help small businesses and farmers groups in the developing world to effectively adapt to climate change. And what we do here is we address a number of barriers, among which, for example, there's really a lack of knowledge and capacity about economically viable climate resilient practices, like, for example, agroforestry. And then there are also high costs and risks associated with a change of practices of agricultural output. And then there's, of course, little access to adaptation-focused investors, and investors mostly don't appreciate these effects because, as I mentioned above, we don't have that common understanding about how to monitor and evaluate impacts. And that's actually the fourth barrier. Since there's such a low capacity to monitor and evaluate what's happening, there are also few lessons learned and lessons shared around the global community. And this is where we're really at the beginning, and we need to address these barriers both on the ground and at the institutional policy level to scale nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based adaptation. I guess something that's a little positive maybe is that, for example, the Global Risk Report 2020 by the World Economic Forum listed all 4 very, very likely risks to be nature related, meaning that there really is a lot more common understanding today about the importance of nature to our global economy than even 10 years ago. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ers. So I just want to give a huge thanks to all of our 5 panelists so far. We've had some very interesting contributions. And I also wanted to mention that we've really done the span of various sectors, from academic to NGO, Indigenous peoples, government, and the financial sector. And so I would like to take the opportunity for you to take a moment now and include your questions for the panelists in the chat. We'll be taking 2 to 3 questions and inviting our panelists to respond to. Maybe all of our panelists can unmute themselves and put their videos on. And if, when appropriate, they can jump in and answer the question and share speaking time. And we do have a first question coming in here. Thank you, Gabby, for sharing it with me. And it's been translated into English so that everyone can take the opportunity to answer here. But the question being, Colombia and other South American countries present a high biodiversity, therefore more susceptible to losing it. The question is, how can we promote nature-based solutions in countries with a growing increase in deforestation rates and at the services of extractive industries and activities? So would any of our panelists like to take a first try at this question?
Well, I'm happy to have a go, and then I'm looking forward to hearing what the others have to say. I think, yes, the answer is in the question. The first thing is that we should not be distracted from the systemic change that we need to create an enabling environment for nature-based solutions. That's the first thing I'll say. So that means addressing the drivers of forest loss, understanding the fact that the most cost-effective action is just not degrading nature in the first place. Transmitting this understanding. I think nature-based solutions shouldn't be seen as a quick fix to these problems. They can be very effective, but only in an economy that recognizes that we need to thrive within limits. And I'll stop there for now.
Great. I'll invite someone to jump in if you have anything else to add. Otherwise, we'll pass on to the next question. Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to check the chat here for an extra question, but if anyone did want to add to that, please feel free to jump in. All right, so we have a good next question here from Jose Francisco Dorantes, and he says, can green roofs and potagers be nature-based solutions to solve problems in cities, such as defaunation or urban heat islands? people asked for examples about what nature-based solutions look like. And I'll give a little preview to our youth panel that will be featuring some implementation of nature-based solutions and some storytelling as well. But would love to hear from your personal experience and your expertise. If you could share if those are in fact nature-based solutions and if you have other examples to contribute. Thank you.
Well, let me just say, and I have to say, in my beginning intervention, I hope it was clear that I think that nature-based solutions is a term that has quite a lack of sort of conceptual clarity in terms of what is and what isn't nature-based solutions. The IUCN has sort of tried to provide some of that, but you know, as Alexander noted, you know, tree plantations are not nature-based solutions, and yet, you know, many corporate actors are talking about the nature-based solutions as, you know, they're as planting lots and lots of trees. Nature-based solutions, yes, absolutely, potager and green roofs, those sorts of things fit under this very large umbrella of nature-based solutions. In fact, that umbrella captures a lot of things. And I think we need better conceptual ways. And I don't actually think that the IUCN work goes far enough in conceptual ways of like what is a nature-based solution and what isn't a nature-based solution. And this is why my advice is to actually stick with the terms which have much more conceptual clarity in terms of ecosystem-based adaptation, because sure, potager and green roofs, absolutely, and yeah, so is large-scale afforestation, according to at least some actors in the space.
Thank you for that, Dr. Stabinsky. Now, I just saw that Alexander unmuted himself. I wonder if that's because you wanted to jump in. I know that you work closely with IUCN in developing these principles, and your latest report in 2019, I believe. Feel free, and I would love to give the other panelists as well a chance to respond.
Yes, we've definitely done work with the IUCN, although not on the standard explicitly. We did provide feedback. But we also worked on providing for broad policy guidelines on to frame nature-based solutions in policy, and these are available on our website. I'll share a link. So much to discuss. I think the first thing I wanted to say is that for me, yeah, urban green roofs definitely fall under the scope of what are called urban nature-based solutions. I think it's important to discuss what is and what isn't, but it should not distract us from, okay, what is a solution that works for that particular city? And if green roofs provide a means to alleviate urban water drainage problems, then it says I'm disconnected, or oh, never mind. Am I sharing this?
My apologies. I think something
fine.
just happened, but we've
I thought that was me, and I was like, what's going on?
No problem.
No worries. So yeah, so for me, I think yes, if it's a tangible solution to a problem the city is facing, then and also if it's done in a way that contributes to urban biodiversity, then it also aligns with that principle I was mentioning. I'll leave it at that because perhaps others have points to make.
Thank you. And I would love to invite the other panelists. I might also share one more question that shifts the concept to a little bit more about international development. So the question from Samuel Fanning is, how can we better include nature-based solutions in international development and aid projects? And how can we find other sources of funding for nature-based solutions projects? So I feel like that question might be steering towards Ers if you have a response, and then Minnie and Rosa, we haven't heard from you yet if you'd like to contribute. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah, I think there has been a wake-up call in official development assistance and in general multilateral aid projects to really be pragmatic and try to measure the right things and not the wrong things. So often input is being measured. So how much money is being given, how many hours are being spent, but it's not necessarily output or outcome focused. And that comes again to what I was saying earlier with impact measurement. How do we agree about what do we want to achieve? How do we measure it? And what metrics do we use? And I feel there are some very interesting innovations coming up more from the tech space also when it comes to remote sensing and when it really comes to empowering local stakeholders with mobile phone-based applications to create more transparency into what is actually happening on the ground. So that is, I think, a very promising development. Another development that I find very promising is that public funders and also philanthropic funders more and more open themselves up to combining their capital with private investors. That means that they achieve a so-called blended finance structure. So this means with every $1 that a donor country would give, they could leverage 5 or 10 private capital dollars. And that's necessary because we currently have about 30 billion per year in funding US dollars for biodiversity and natural capital, but we need about up to 700 billion each year. And governments will never be able to scale that up. And this really led them to realize, okay, let's be more pragmatic and we really need to act now. And it's very, very important to deliberate about what do we want to achieve and how and who to include 100%. That's like the backbone. But we also need to do something like act now and get going, really, get out of the inertia. And that's something that I'm seeing and that I find is encouraging amidst all the trouble.
Thank you for that. And I think I'll just wrap it up there, if that's okay, because we have to keep moving with our agenda. But I did want to share a huge thanks to all of our panelists. I'm seeing Minnie unmute herself. So if you wanted to add, we welcome you to the space, especially as you had so well put about communities being central to the implementation management of nature-based solutions. So I think, Minnie, I'll let you have the last word.
Yes, thank you very much. And I will try to sort of respond to the different questions. Again, let us not lose sight of what we are trying to solve. If we are only trying to conserve or have these nature-based solutions in areas and trying to scale this up, this will not solve anything because we are not going into the question of why we are in this situation. It's because we have become greedy. We have treated nature very violently, and that has to change. Secondly, even if there is finance, there's funding available, often this funding lies with big NGOs, with governments, and this disables a lot of communities who are doing the actual work. They're not able to do the work because it gets stuck in big NGOs and with governments. And that all of this, so again, I go back to my 2 points. And the first one is the sincerity of purpose. What is the purpose on why we are doing nature-based solutions? Are we addressing the real issue, or are we doing it patchwork, like having green roofs in the cities? Does this really solve the problem? It can probably serve as a band-aid, but does it solve the bigger problem? It can create more problems because then they will say, oh, now it's good to stay in the cities because they have green roofs anyway. So there's more out migration. So we have to connect all of these with the other issues. And then the second one is the process. And again, until indigenous and local communities are fully engaged in the process, no matter how good your project is, if there's no participation, there can be no sustainability and there is no ownership. So these 2 points are very, very important to remember when we are doing nature-based solutions. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think those points are so important to reinforce. I said I'd give you the last word, and I realized that, Rosa, you haven't had a chance to intervene. If you wanted to give the last remarks, I think we'll pass it over to you, and then I will be passing it to Gabby. Thank you very much for all your good questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. I just wanted to add two two points that I've thought because of the questions. The first one is that the beauty of working with ecosystems is that they help you to address a lot of issues together. And from the point of view of the policy making, this is very important. And given this, having said this, I think it's very important also to bring evidence for the allocation of resources, also thinking on the side of policy making. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for those points there. And I want to thank every single one of you panelists as part of our senior panel, setting the stage for us here with the definition, the opportunities, the barriers to nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches to climate adaptation. And so I will now hand over the mic to Gabby, our Latin American regional coordinator and of the Caribbean, who will be passing us off to a wellness break.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're listening to me right now. I'm the person also handling the tech support, but I'm using this account because I have better internet. So now we are sharing another part of the AHA slides because we want you to have this moment to take a break, drink some water, take a walk. But we would love for those who still are here in Zoom also to participate with us, to know what are your opinions. So we want to know first, what does nature mean to you? So we want you to answer on AHA slide. We are going to send you the link right now, so you can share with us a little bit of also your opinion about nature and nature-based solution, because we want to interact as much as possible with you and have this opportunity to understand what are your thoughts about this. So I'm sending the link to you right now, and you are going to be able to give your opinion. So we are already receiving a lot of things, and that's great. It is amazing to have you answering our questions. So nature for a lot of life, life as well in Spanish, vida, everything. I love this idea as nature as everything. This is actually also how all the objects and things we have created with nature. We have other things as inner peace, oportunidad, animals, peace. What other answers you have? Food. Yes, food is also an important part of nature. Wisdom, also a place we can get wisdom from, right? So we had a lot of great answers. Thank you so much for participating. We are going now for going to the next question. Is about what's your The question is, which kind of future do you want? We want to know about the future you envision. Talking about nature, so what is this future that we want? I wish I was reading the translations as well. Sorry about that. So which kind of future do you want? Que futuro deseas? Quel genre d'avenir voulez-vous? We're already receiving a lot of answers. So some of you are saying you want a future conserved nature, and I think that's so good to see we are aligned with that. A lot of you are also sharing you wish for a peaceful future, happy future, a clean world. Also a thing we need with this approach, that adaptation approach. What else? You're changing so fast. See, you're contributing a lot. We have already 70 people online. on my slide, and that's amazing, you all. We also have other answers like saludable, a healthy future is very important as well, a balanced future, with a future with justice. That's something that is very important as well, to have this connection with nature, but also to have justice for people. This social aspect is also very interesting in bringing it. Partner with nature, a future that we are partners with nature, that's great. Peaceful, it was, I think I said before, but I think it is a good one as well. Healthy future, and respectful. What else you're saying? There is a lot of different remarks, and I think that's great. It shows the diversity we have here. I have future generation for generations. That's an important thing. We talk in the youth movement how we have to act now so we can have a better future for us, but also for the future generations. And it was great to hear. Now the next question. Now I want to know from you, which kind of present do you want? So, que tipo de presente deseas e quelle raison voulez-vous? And it is related with what I was saying, right? We are acting now because we want to change the future, but also because we want a different now so we can have a better future. And for that, we need to start acting, start having ambitions in our projects, already receiving a lot of answers. So a lot of you are saying that the present you want is connected. And I think that remark how we need to be in this connection and this exchange with each other to understand quick what we want. Okay, so we will have just some more seconds so you can share, and we can still keep on time for the next panel. And so a lot of you are saying about a peaceful as well. So equity to the table. I think the biggest word is equity now, and that's great. And now we are going to the last question. So we can answer the last question that's going to be, what are the actions you are willing to take here? We talked about future, present, what nature means to you. Now I want you to say, what are the actions we need to do so we can have this present and this future that we want? So share your words. We will give you some seconds so we can know what are your remarks about that. So a lot of people are talking about investigar, so have researchers, advocate to have the best, become political leaders, also more awareness of these topics. And well, it was great to hear you. But since we don't have a lot of time and we really want to get the best from our next panel, thank you so much for contributing, and we will have more opportunities to do that. So now I will pass to Paola so she can start the youth panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Hello, everyone. Welcome back from your wellness break. I hope you are ready to start with me the next panel. We are very, very excited. Thank you so much for joining and participating in this event. First, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Paola Diaz, a member of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, Chapter Mexico, and I'm going to be facilitating this session. So our panel today is formed by young conservationists with different backgrounds and experiences. And the objective will be to discuss opportunities and challenges for scaling up nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches for adaptation. So the dynamic of the panel will be the following. We're going to ask a question to each of the participants, so we have the opportunity to listen to their answers from their own perspective and experience as young activists. At the end of the panel, we're going to have a Q&A session. So we urge you to write down your questions in the Q&A feature at the end of the panel. I also want to remind you that we have Spanish and French interpretation, so please feel free to select the language you prefer. Okay, so without any further introduction, I'd like to start with our first panelist. She's Mirna Fernandez. Mirna is a young Bolivian passionate about the conservation of biodiversity, art, and culture. She studied environmental engineering and plastic arts and a master's degree in biodiversity and tropical ecosystems in Belgium. She volunteers from an early age as part of global youth movements focused on climate change, biodiversity, and sustainable development. And she's the co-founder of Reacción Climática, which promotes joint actions against climate change in Bolivia, and has worked in environmental management, formal and non-formal education, political advocacy, and technical assistance to indigenous peoples in local communities. Mirna, thank you so much for being here today with us. You have been involved since a young age in environmental activism. So from your experience, which transformations do we need in order to prevent ecological crisis, and what solutions could there be?
Thank you, Paola. I hope you can hear me well. Okay, then thanks for your question. It is indeed a very big question, so I'm going to try to go by parts. First, I'm going to try to talk about the ecological crisis. Then I'm going to talk about the transformations that we need in order to prevent this ecological crisis. And finally, I'm going to talk about the solutions that there could be for us and how we can decide on which ones to promote. So first, talking about the ecological crisis, it is important to say that we are already facing an ecological crisis, and we can see the symptoms of this ecological crisis everywhere. We have seen in the past year that forest fires have been increasing, not only in the tropical countries, but all over the world, creating massive destruction for ecosystems and immense impacts for the people that depend on these ecosystems. We are also facing a pandemic that has changed our lives completely. And we know that one of the direct causes of the spread of zoonotic diseases is the land use change and the exploitation of wildlife. This ecological crisis is happening because we are surpassing many of the planetary boundaries that we needed to respect in order to have our ecosystems balance in place. We have surpassed the limits of fossil fuel emissions and the greenhouse gases emissions, so we're facing climate change, we are facing biodiversity loss, we are facing a lot of pollution that is changing the biochemical flows, and all of these planetary boundaries that we are surpassing takes us to this collapse of our ecosystems. The main reason for us reaching this point is the economic system that drives our societies, that is based on an unsustainable way of extracting the natural resources, but also on an equal way of distribution of the benefits of this extraction for the people in the world. So at the same time that it generates a lot of impacts on the ecosystems, it also generates inequalities and poverty. So if all of this is happening, we might ask ourselves why we are not doing something to change all of this. And maybe the reason is that the transformations that we need to change are really big. And maybe not everybody is prepared, or not everybody is willing to pursue such transformations. The main transformation that we need to make is a fundamental drift in our values and principles that shape our societies and that lead this economic system. And to change these values and principles, we need to change our systems of education. We need to promote an education that reconnects us with nature, that brings us back to our roots, and maybe we, in a way that we can learn from our ancestors or from indigenous peoples and local communities that have been living in harmony with nature over millennia, and maybe we can learn from them and change our behaviors. We also need a transformation in our governance systems so they can deliver in the well-being of humans and ecosystems and not on the profits. And talking about the solutions that could be there, some of the solutions that are there might be real solutions, but some of the solutions that are promoted are false solutions. So it is very difficult sometimes to understand which are the real and which are the false solutions. But from what we know, some of the real solutions that are most important for our ecosystems are first a drastic reduction in the greenhouse gases as CO2. We need to enhance biodiversity conservation in an equitable way, and we need to promote a real ecosystems restoration, which is very difficult, and it should be the last step of our efforts. And some of the false solutions that are being promoted are commercial tree plantations and monoculture and bioenergy for generation, for example, that are promoted as nature-based solutions, but have very big impacts on the communities and lives of people. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, it is very important to ask ourselves if they fall into the real or into the false group of solutions. And the response and the answer to this question maybe will lie into the definition of the concept of nature-based solutions and the guidelines for its implementation. We need a definition that includes safeguards for biodiversity, for the local communities, and respects the ways of life and territories of indigenous peoples. And if we don't have such a concept, maybe it would be better to stay with a concept that already has a more comprehensive approach and ensures that it delivers for the benefits of conservation of ecosystems, the sustainable management of ecosystems, and for the human well-being. Such a concept already exists in the Convention on Biological Diversity. It has been mentioned by some of our speakers previously, which is the ecosystem-based approaches. So maybe taking into account this concept that already exists would be safer than taking into account a concept that can lead into some of the false solutions that we have been talking about. I think that I am already in time, so I will leave you there and will be happy to answer any question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mirna, for your very valuable insights on where we are standing and which transformation are needed. So I'd like now to continue with our next panelists. We're going to have, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a Q&A session, so we can have a more dialogue with our panelists. So our next panelist is Maria Cecilia Laporta. She's a specialist in integrated coastal management and a public accountant. She works in the development of projects with rural producers in artisanal fisherwomen in the Bañados del Este Biosphere Reserve in Uruguay. Since 2020, she has been working at UNESCO, and since 2018, she has been a member of the Invero Map and the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Together with her sister and the organization Yaku Pacha, which means World of Water, she carries out a research and conservation project for marine mammals in Uruguay. So Cecilia, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The next question we would like to ask is, from your perspective, which are the opportunities that offer nature-based solutions?
Thank you, Paola, and hello, everyone. I'm going to speak in Spanish because I'm from Uruguay and this is my mother language. So I give you just one moment to turn your interpretation. Bueno, hola a todos y todas. Es un placer para nosotros estar compartiendo esta jornada con ustedes, entre tantos jóvenes del mundo, unidos para pensar un sistema diferente y un planeta en armonía. Yo quiero que sepan que hablo desde la representación de la juventud del MAP, el programa de reservas de biosfera de la UNESCO, y bueno, estamos muy felices de poder participar en esta instancia y compartir nuestras experiencias y reflexiones. En primer lugar, contarles un poco de lo que son las reservas de biosfera que surgen en los años 70 y se enmarcan en un programa de ciencias naturales y sociales para el uso de la sostenibilidad, el uso sostenible, la conservación de la biodiversidad y la mejora de las relaciones entre las personas y su medio ambiente. En los inicios, el programa mostró un esquema que nosotros en español le llamamos del huevo frito, donde en el corazón, en la yema, estarían los sitios o las zonas que deberían estar intocadas, y en los laterales, digamos, yendo hacia la parte blanca, zonas en las que la protección de la biodiversidad y la producción se comparten o se equilibran de manera sustentable. Este tema ha sido muy cuestionado por los habitantes de la reserva de biosfera, pero también por los jóvenes, y si bien hoy podemos decir que se mantiene, digamos, en los papeles, existe un cierto consenso de que las reservas de biosfera no son sitios de experimentación, sino áreas donde las comunidades habitan su territorio desde una interrelación donde la naturaleza y la cultura están en constante movimiento, generando conocimiento y buscando soluciones a las problemáticas que se van presentando. De alguna manera que esta herramienta o que esta concepción, digamos, de las reservas de biosfera vaya mutando, vaya cambiando, nos habla también de que esta herramienta aún es una oportunidad, aún es una herramienta útil, digamos, para promover el cambio que queremos ver. Y esta es la visión que muchos de los jóvenes que vivimos y que trabajamos en las reservas de biosfera expresamos en la última declaración del segundo foro de jóvenes en China. Y hablo del foro ahora porque creemos también que estas redes y la generación de las redes de reservas de biosfera, pero también la Global Youth, el Youth for Nature y estas otras agrupaciones de jóvenes que estamos relacionándonos y trabajando en pos, digamos, de un cambio, como hablaba Mirna, son también una oportunidad para concebirlo y para construirlo. Entonces, relacionando también con lo que se habló en el primer panel, nosotros conseguimos que la diferenciación entre la naturaleza y la cultura es totalmente arbitraria, y que las barreras de donde comienza una y termina la otra son muy difusas. Entonces, en este sentido, las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza también provienen de la cultura, de los saberes, de lo ancestral, de las poblaciones antiguas, pero también de las de ahora. Y que las adaptaciones que han generado las comunidades en sus territorios en función de lo que son y de lo que el ambiente, o sea, y de lo que los rodea, ¿no? De lo que son con y con el ambiente, son, digamos, las cosas que debemos como mirar y apuntar. Y en este sentido, las reservas de biosfera de la UNESCO son sitios donde esa interrelación está completamente viva y se ve y se vive claramente. No importa si miramos una comunidad que vive en el medio de la montaña de Europa, o si vamos a la sabana africana, o si miramos una isla en América Latina, o una zona de serranía en Asia. En todos esos sitios vamos a encontrar comunidades que habitan sus territorios desde el conocimiento de los ciclos naturales, en diferentes escalas de tiempo y de espacio, donde producen alimentos, donde comparten sus saberes y expresan esas interrelaciones en sus manifestaciones culturales. Entonces, en esta oportunidad, la juventud del MAP también queremos compartir que las soluciones están, digamos, basadas en la naturaleza, también dependen de nosotros y están en nosotros, en cómo conocemos nuestro territorio, qué hacemos con ello, cómo aplicamos la tecnología que se desarrolla a nivel mundial, pero también a nivel local, y cómo compartimos nuestros conocimientos para lograr habitar ese territorio con mayor armonía, desde lo local a lo global. No existe una solución única, y no podemos simplificar el complejo de relaciones que existen entre la gente y su territorio en una solución única. Entonces, es preciso pensar en lo complejo, tener mucha paciencia y comprender el territorio como un todo integrado y a las relaciones que se generan en él, intentar entenderlas para pensar las soluciones desde una perspectiva que integre y que contemple a todos en este proceso, y a todas y en especial también a mujeres y jóvenes. Entonces, en este sentido, reforzamos la idea de las reservas de biosfera como una oportunidad donde nos podemos acercar, vivenciar, investigar estas relaciones, y la oportunidad que nos brindan las redes que generamos de jóvenes y de nivel también senior, para dar a conocer y compartir estos saberes. Las lecciones que aprendemos en estos procesos, el trabajo en asociatividad, creemos que esa es una gran oportunidad y que es un factor que no podemos concebir el futuro sin pensarlo desde la asociatividad y desde estar juntos. Los hitos claves también que identificamos en este proceso, o en esos factores de éxito que podríamos decir, pero la oportunidad sobre todo de compartir esas experiencias que, si bien cada realidad es diferente y cada reserva de biosfera es diferente, el compartir esas experiencias nos van a permitir abrir nuestros esquemas de pensamiento sobre lo que es posible, pero también hacer crecer nuestra imaginación de lo que podemos incluso desear. Y por qué no también entonces allanar el camino para lograrlo. Desde la juventud del MAP también queremos como involucrarnos con los sitios desde un conocimiento donde existe, digamos, un conocimiento ancestral al que debemos acercarnos, y no con el fin de recuperar para publicar, ¿no? Que nosotros siempre cuestionamos un poco eso, sino de conocerlo para compartirlo, para potenciarlo junto al conocimiento científico, para trasladarlo a la esfera de lo gubernamental y lo local, porque ahí también es donde podemos dar el verdadero cambio que se merece nuestra sociedad, y consolidar estas prácticas para que se transformen realmente en soluciones que nos permitan, bueno, una transformación genuina del sistema que, como decía Mirna, tiene que cambiar sus valores y donde la vida tiene que estar en el centro de nuestras decisiones.
Gracias, Cecilia. Thank you so much. This is definitely a very interesting and inspiring remarks in terms of the practical view that we have of NBS, and also taking into consideration these cultural aspects when thinking about these solutions. Thank you so much for that. So our next panelist is Nawayo Silishevo. He is the co-founder of the Young Emerging Farmers Initiative, or YEFI, which is a non-governmental organization in Zambia. YEFI promotes, mobilizes, and empowers youth in rural and urban areas in agricultural activities that contribute towards the creation of wealth and employment opportunities for young people in Africa. In 2019, he was privileged to be among 100 young people across the globe that attended and participated in the Global Youth Employment Forum in Abuja. He's also a 2021 finalist for the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders. And well, his passion for making a difference in his community and country compels him to put his best into his work. Now, it is a pleasure to have you here in this panel. You have been involved in several environmental projects, and after listening some of the potential opportunities of NBS, we'd like to ask you, which do you think are also the potential impacts of nature-based solutions, and how could we evaluate them or measure them?
Okay, thank you very much, Paola. I'm glad and delighted to be here. So I'll be very specific and try to relate my submission to my experience. Yes, so coming from the Young Emerging Farmers Initiative, I would love to state that nature provides a basis for agriculture and everything else that be. Nature-based solutions, the broader concept of nature-based solutions seek to conserve, to protect, as well as to restore nature. And what that implies for us who are in agriculture is that when nature is protected, agriculture is protected, and when nature is restored, agriculture is equally restored. And all this has a direct impact on food security. So the two concepts, nature and agriculture, are intricately linked. You cannot produce without maintaining nature. And from my experience, the loss of nature has adversely impacted the agriculture sector, both in my country, Zambia, and also the African continent at large. The number one contributor of this loss of nature is deforestation. Traditionally, and also commercially, farming practices in this part of the world encourage massive cutting down of trees, which leads to deforestation and loss of forest areas. Yeah, and settlements and constructions have also contributed in the recent past, but deforestation has immensely contributed to erratic rainfall, flooding, and many changes in our climate. In short, what I'm trying to put across is that deforestation is responsible for many negative changes in our weather. Negative changes, to be very categorical. The effects of deforestation have a direct impact on small-scale farmers. Now you wish to know that small-scale farmers are the majority of farmers in Africa, because most of these farmers also depend on rain-fed agriculture. So when we experience things like flooding, erratic rainfall, this category of farmers is highly affected. However, in our case, we have been trying to employ the use of nature-based solutions in reversing the damages that we have already caused to nature, and also just to make sure that we do not cause more damages. We have been carrying out massive tree planting exercises and campaigns. In 2020 alone, given the emergency of the coronavirus and the restrictions that were put in place, we were still able to plant a lot of trees, more than 500 trees. And also in the last 5 years, as Young Emerging Farmers Initiative, we've been able to build the capacity of many young farmers in sustainable organic agriculture techniques. We have been able to train them in different techniques around sustainable organic agriculture. We have also been training young farmers to conserve their natural systems and nature, in short, and also just to discourage them from cutting down trees for different purposes. But the largest purpose is charcoal production. So we have been trying to discourage this vice by providing alternative agricultural practices. Yeah, so in a nutshell, nature-based solutions are regenerative and are giving us an opportunity to reverse the damage that we have caused to our nature, giving us an opportunity, like I mentioned earlier, to conserve our nature, to protect our nature, and also to restore our nature. The plight of our future in terms of food security largely lies in effectively implementing these nature-based solutions. And to tackle the second part of my question, evaluation of nature-based solutions, I think this requires us to put in place strong and clear legal frameworks that will guide and compel the implementation of nature-based solutions. And these solutions should be clearly spelled out in both long-term and short-term plans. We also need to make sure that we mainstream nature-based solutions in our national policies. There has to be clearly written and signed commitments of what should be done, how it should be done, and when it should be done. And this should also take a top-down approach from the international level and the highest form of leadership up to our local communities in all parts of the world. That way, we will be able to go back to the commitments and check if we are on the right path and we are doing the things that we have committed to do.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
that is my small submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, this is definitely very valuable in terms of what you are working with your organization, with young people, with young farmers. This is very valuable for us and for our discussion today. I would like now to introduce our next panelist. He's an environmental and climate activist. He's Joshua Amphonsen. He's an adaptation fellow at the Global Center on Adaptation and the founder of Green Africa Youth Organization. Joshua focuses on the role of youth in climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and resilience building. He is the lead author of the first ever background paper on youth and climate change adaptation, which provides a pathway for youth engagement in global adaptation efforts. In Ghana, he's leading the Water and Adaptation for Adaptation and Sustainable Communities project, where he builds the capacity of youth to support community resilience through ecosystem-based adaptation measures, sustainable agriculture practices, and disaster risk reduction. So Joshua, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. So as a youth leader and founder of the Green Africa Youth Organization, which is your perspective on how do we avoid greenwashing or carbon colonialism in a context of where we are using the concept of nature-based solutions?
Well, thank you very much, Paola, and thank you for Youth for Nature, Global Youth Biodiversity Network, the Government of Canada for putting this event together. Absolutely fantastic to bring young leaders together to put focus on how we see adaptation and our role in that. The issue around greenwashing and using nature-based solution for the wrong purposes, it's something that is very critical. How we avoid that, I think that will come through so many different ways, and a few of them that I'm going to mention. The first one is how we, as young people, how we use the language. Let me start from that. Before I get to the finger pointing of how the corporate world is using this, how some governments are using that, let's start with ourselves. One of the challenges I have seen working with a lot of young people over the past 6 years have been to a certain degree, our limited knowledge and understanding on certain terminologies. And as during the senior speakers, there was a comment where the implications of concepts when it comes to policymaking and the uptake of these concepts at the policy level. So the first thing I would say is that we as young leaders implementing projects, working on the ground, we need to put in effort in understanding what nature-based solutions are, what do they really mean, and when do we use these terminologies when describing our projects. So if you have a project, and I really like earlier how Alexandre also tried to sort of bring in what is and what might not be, we might not have to focus so much on that because we really need to scale solutions, and that is the most important thing now. But we also need to try to avoid having to paint the wrong picture for nature-based solutions, because then we are advocating for what we probably do not want to advocate for. So increasing understanding is very important, and I will use this opportunity to highlight all the upcoming courses and online materials that will be available on nature-based solutions and young people. I know tomorrow there'll be one launching at the Youth for Climate Adaptation Conference, which I have been part of the team bringing this together with some youth networks. I know Youth for Nature was also involved in this, and this will be launched tomorrow. And I think that we need to upskill our knowledge on this context so we know how to represent it. The other part is also having the confidence to be able to call out when corporates brand their social impact projects and corporate responsibility projects as nature-based solutions when they are not. And one important part is these projects are typically mitigation projects. I like earlier how the linkage between NBS and ecosystem-based adaptation was drawn. And if a project is typically just planting trees, taking lands, taking forest away from communities, say that communities do not have a livelihood anymore, that is certainly not an ecosystem-based adaptation project. That is certainly not nature-based solution. What solution is it solving? Is rather knocking people into poverty, and we should be able to call that out and be able to say that this is not what nature-based solution is supposed to be, and we need to advocate that these corporate entities switch and up their game and rather really work together with communities. And if it's going to be a tree planting project, then you need to take into consideration culture, community, society, and people who really own the land and own the place. And that is very important. So our ability to understand the skill dedication part, to be able to know what is and what is not, and be able to call out when these things happen is very important. The third thing is, I would say, is we being able to communicate and spread the good solutions and the best practices. Of course, if we don't understand and we don't know, then we can't even spread and exchange and really amplify. It's very amazing that before, when the minister gave his remarks, he mentioned how the government of Canada is supporting through this adaptation fellowship to get more young people into the professional adaptation space, to be able to upskill their knowledge, work on projects, and to be able to amplify that. And I'm one of those fellows, and I'm very proud of that. And we need more of these fellowships happening, such that we can get a lot of young people getting the opportunity to really increase their professional skills and knowledge on this topic, to be able to come up with solutions. And we need a platform which can sell these solutions. And when I say sell, it means that really increasing the publicity of it, say that we can have more people being aware and being able to really know what the good examples are, practice it, replicate it, have exchanges, and be able to further scale NBS across the world. So I'm going to end it here because my 1 minute is over, my 5 minutes is over. And what I would say is that for young people and for myself and the movement and community I represent, NBS is very important because it offers longevity. I mean, we could practice solutions and adaptation in so many other ways, building bridges, building dikes, building walls, whatever. It is good, but these things have limitation in terms of scale and time. And for young people who we have to live quite a number of years left, we really need to push for solutions that have really a lot of ripple effect. That is, of course, sequestrating carbon, of course, making sure that communities are much safer and it's not limited and having an expiring date on it, because nature is regenerative and it doesn't have an expiry date. And this is what we need to push for. Thank you.
Thank you, Yosha. This was very compelling. We'll definitely need to look at that direction where we can have a common understanding on what NBS are and how can we communicate better the concept. Okay, thank you so much for that. So I'd like to introduce our last panelist. He's Anthony Ramon Perez Soto. He's a young activist from Punta Arenas, Costa Rica. He descends from the Chorotega and Huetar indigenous groups in Costa Rica. Tony's family is immersed in a matrilineal model, which prompted him to question gender inequalities from a very early age, given that his national context tends to favor men over women. Tony is currently pursuing a master's degree at DePaul University in Chicago in applied diplomacy. He recently graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science and German from Luther College, Iowa. And as the regional program director for Earth Guardians, Tony assists with permaculture, ecological agriculture, training and education projects in countries such as Mexico, Brazil, Togo, India, and Germany. Anthony, thank you so much for being here. Given your experience in the development of several projects around the world, we wanted to ask you, how do you think can equity and rights safeguards be ensured while implementing NBS, and which could be the challenges?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay. Yeah, hello, thank you everybody, and thank you for everybody who has already spoken and for everybody who's on here. So I definitely think a lot about, when we're implementing a project, specifically if it is a NBS project or like something different, how can we ensure the people's rights? How can we ensure equity? And I know that there is a lot of conversation about diversity, and this is something that really brings me to question, how do we embrace diversity? And with that, how do we relate that diversity to empowerment? A lot of the things that we hear here, is how do we work with indigenous communities? And we need to be really careful about that, in the sense that when we're working with indigenous communities, specifically in a colonial way, or like in a sort of like more superior way, right? In the way that things have been framed, like the framework that we do, we need to be really careful in that when we go to work with a community, or like we have a project with a specific community, we need to make sure that they have the tools themselves, that they can learn, what is it that we're doing with them. And at that, I always see the base of it being, what is it that they need the most, right? From their own perspective, from their own, cosmovision, from their own point of view. And these are things that, in my perspective, really bring equity to the table, because many of the times when we're talking about, policies, we're talking about economic reforms, we're talking about, land disputes, we're talking about XYZ project, whether that is an environmental project or like a social project. Oftentimes, the people, who are primarily to be impacted by this proposal is not at the table. And with that, and with my own personal background, I see how indigenous people are lacking that voice. So to increase that equity and really to become more intentional about that, I always think, how can we amplify their voices? how can we continue to bring them to the table, right? And that really looks in that, you know, whenever we're planning something, be that in, you know, Togo, be that in Mexico, be that in Brazil, you know, we really need to take into consideration what is the opinion of the people who are there, you know, and that they have a say in that. And this is something that I think, you know, needs to go hand in hand with also scientific solutions, or like with scientific evidence that needs to be provided. When I think too about how we can bring equity, you know, I think about politics, and I guess this may be as well because my academic background is also in political science, but I think about politics not necessarily being completely, you know, exclusive to those, you know, politicians up in the Senate, up in the executive powers and legislative powers and so forth. But I really think about the politics in a more organic way, right? In a more one-to-one way. And the way that we engage in those conversations about politics, you know, there needs to be a conversation too about the connection between politics and the environment, right? And again, oftentimes I know that there are different components, you know, to a specific project, you know, that may sort of like outweigh another one. And it is really bringing that balance, you know, of like, okay, are we really doing, you know, a nature-based solution approach for a specific context, you know, because we want to like politically, you know, have a better image, or like because we really want to do this environmental change? Or is it really because we want to profit from that? I think from the senior panel, there were a lot of conversations about, you know, the economic aspect of it, you know, and to me, it really hurts, you know, to me, it really hurts to see that a lot of the thinking that goes into a nature-based solution approach at times, you know, includes this economic approach, or like this economic regard in a manner that is more important than other ones. And so I also want to say, you know, when we think about equity, we need to think about accountability. And that accountability really comes from the politicians, really for the people that you voted for the things that you consume, for the projects that you support, for the charity that you support. And that accountability really looks in, I hold myself accountable first, you know, and I think this is always the most important part, but I also hold my people around accountable, be that my family, be that my friends, be that the people that I voted for, be that the restaurants where I eat, you know. And this is really one of the paths to get to that, you know, equity when we implement these projects, you know. Can I keep the people that I'm working with accountable for the work that we're doing? And finally, I think that there is too like a lot of conversations between individualism and collectivism, you know. So it's really my idea, you know, as let's say as an outsider in a specific project, more important or like of a heavier weight than a local, you know. And with that too, I would say, you know, how connected I am, you know, like how sensitive, how understanding am I to those others who are in the group, to those others who I'm aiming to support, right? And that, I think that is a really big conversation, specifically in the US context. You know, that conversation about individualism and collectivism, it is something that needs to be at the core of how we do projects and how we implement this sort of solutions without violating people's basic or fundamental rights.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for these wonderful remarks, and because you talked about also of the importance of amplifying the voices of different actors, especially indigenous peoples, local communities, but also thank you for inviting us to think in a more collective way when addressing these environmental challenges. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your valuable insights. We have some questions from our audience. We're kind of running out of time, but we'll try to answer as much as we can. So in this sense, I will start with a question from Patrick Ryan Bello. he says that development, aggression negatively impacts ecosystem, biodiversity, and lives and livelihoods, and yet is prioritized for economic benefits. What message do you have for youth activists and impacted communities raising their voice on this matter? So whoever wants to start, you can turn on your cameras. Please feel free to answer this question.
Hello, I will just react to this quickly. I think the challenge is that development is highly important in the same place where if you do it wrongly, it costs a lot. And that is the situation here. So this aggressive development becomes sort of a challenge to deal with. My recommendation in terms of how do we stop this is not something that we can sort of entirely stop. What I'd rather probably push for is that we try to build our capacity as people who understand what development is supposed to be and be able to provide recommendations and put those recommendations forward in terms of how this is supposed to be done. I'll give a very quick example. In 2015, 2015, the government of Ghana, for instance, wanted to set up a coal-fired power plant in Ghana because we needed energy urgently. This is development. We need the energy for industries to grow. At the same time, there were a lot of youth organizations who believed that a coal-fired power plant is not the best way to go. So how do we go about that? Was a lot of advocacy and a lot of policy recommendations on how that same amount of money that could go into coal energy could be driven into renewable energy or other forms of energy that brings more value to communities than a coal-fired power plant. So I think that we have to sometimes speak the language of development workers as well as the language of policymakers to be able to influence them.
Thank you so much, Joshua. We also have another question. They're asking through which mechanisms could a more active and significant youth participation in climate change adaptation and mitigation actions be promoted at the local, or international scales? Maybe Mirna or Nawa or Cecilia could help us with this, or maybe Anthony.
Paola, could you please text the question in the chat?
Yeah, sure. I will also repeat it. Through which mechanisms can we ensure youth participation in climate change adaptation and mitigation actions at the local and also at the international levels? How can we assure?
Let me quickly react to this before someone comes in. No, sorry, but I was just going to say that for adaptation, the Youth Adaptation Network is being set up. This will be a network at the global level that will bring young people together under the umbrella of adaptation and provide opportunities for learning, for growth, for development under the theme of adaptation. So this becomes a space to do that. Under the UN framework, of course, the mechanism will then to go through the constituencies under the UN. And there's a youth constituency called the Yongo, which focuses on climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. And this is something that you could plug in and of course, sort of be part of that community in the lead up to COP26 and pre-COP in Italy. And I believe that at the local level, there are youth councils for some countries. There are youth parliaments. There are different youth groups that exist at the country level. I know that for many countries, this is very difficult and it's not non-existent. And if it is not, then we have to create them, right? We need to create those spaces and be able to amplify. Thanks.
Yes, I just want to add that the Convention of Climate Change requires the participation, like the basis participation of the countries. So if there is not created in your country, it is something that we must push and try to develop. And of course, like Joshua says, it's not easy, but it's a requirement for the states that signs these kinds of things, so they should develop it. I'm sorry, it's getting really windy here.
Thank you so much, both Joshua and Cecilia. As we are running out of time, I thank you very much to all the panelists and to the audience. This was a very interesting conversation with you. I really want to express my appreciation for your time given to this panel, and for sharing your thoughts and experiences. So with this being said, I thank you all, and I'll pass it on to Amelia, who is going to introduce us to the next panel. Thank you.
Hola a todas, todes, muy buen día. Muchas gracias, Paola, y al panel de juventudes por tan útil e interesante conversación. Quiero recordarles que tenemos interpretación en inglés. Tenemos interpretación en inglés, español y francés, así que no duden en seleccionar el idioma que prefieran. Les saluda Amelia Arreguín, coordinadora de América Latina y el Caribe de la Red Global de Jóvenes por la Biodiversidad. Es un enorme placer para mí facilitar este bloque para que puedan conocer dos iniciativas lideradas por jóvenes increíbles que a través de la acción local contribuyen a la conservación de la biodiversidad, la adaptación al cambio climático y la promoción de una vida en armonía con la naturaleza. Primero tenemos a Pamela Condori Bernal, de Bolivia. Ella es estudiante de la carrera de Biología en la Universidad Mayor de San Andrés. Trabaja como auxiliar de laboratorio y campo en la unidad de limnología. Es integrante del capítulo de Bolivia de la Red Global de Jóvenes por la Biodiversidad. Y ama a la naturaleza por el conocimiento ancestral, los idiomas, valores, creencias que sus padres le heredaron de las culturas quechua y aymara. Y también está con nosotras Emmanuel Miyoyabikos, de Burundi. Es un activista climático y medioambiental. Es el fundador y director ejecutivo de Greening Burundi, una organización ambiental sin fines de lucro, con jóvenes voluntarios que implementan acciones climáticas y programas de educación ambiental en las escuelas y en su comunidad. Además, Emmanuel es finalista del Premio Mary Robinson de Justicia Climática 2020 y es embajador de la Paz Global 2019. Para empezar entonces con este panel, quiero pedirte a ti, Pamela, que nos cuentes sobre tu proyecto Wawayabi. Adelante.
Ok, espero que me escuchen. Muchas gracias, Ame. Buen día y buenas tardes a todos. Espero que se encuentren muy bien de salud, ustedes y su familia en estos momentos tan críticos por lo que el mundo está pasando. Mi origen viene de dos culturas diferentes. Mi madre es quechua y mi padre es aymara y tienen este tipo de vestimenta en donde yo vivo. El proyecto que les daré a conocer tiene el nombre de Wawañawi, que está escrito en el idioma quechua y significa ojos de niño. Voy a comenzar con la problemática que existe en la ciudad, que es considerada la más alta del mundo, llamada El Alto. Y no sé si puedan notar acá. Esta es una pequeña imagen del lugar donde yo vivo. Lo triste es que hay mucha vegetación no hay mucha vegetación para que los animales endémicos tengan un hábitat. Y poco a poco ha ido disminuyendo con la construcción de casas y esto ha ido desapareciendo. Cerca de donde yo vivo existe la construcción de un pequeño mercado que lo construyeron hace poco, en donde noté que habían residuos orgánicos y las vendedoras de verduras y frutas solo lo desechaban. Lo desechaban los productos que no vendían en los carros de basura que vienen por semana junto a otro tipo de basuras inorgánicas. Y ahí fue donde surgió mi idea de poder usar estos residuos orgánicos de una forma sustentable. Residuos orgánicos cotidianos que normalmente mi familia produce, las colocamos en un recipiente del cual la cuarta parte es destinada para hacer el compostaje con lombrices que tengo en casa. Además que con el resultado del compostaje que me da abono para sustentar un pequeño huerto en mi casa. y el resto lo recoge mi vecina para la alimentación de cerdos, ovejas y pequeños animales que tiene, que se alimentan de estos residuos orgánicos. Y así he intentado que esto se replique más con mis vecinos y también que lo practiquen, y se ha ido dando en personas que realmente están interesadas. Siguiendo con la problemática, al recolectar los residuos orgánicos del mercado, yo creo que se haría un compostaje con las lombrices que yo estoy haciendo para el compost, para poder obtener abono y llegar a construir un invernadero para que este mercado sea autosustentable de forma orgánica con sus productos. En cierta parte, elaborar un vivero para producir árboles nativos y plantarlos en todo el distrito por donde yo vivo, ya que la alcaldía se ha encargado de solamente distribuir plantines que son exóticos. Entonces es lo que yo voy a implementar. Así también hacer la forestación de árboles nativos de una forma sustentable, como les estaba hablando, para la conservación de aves endémicas que existen en esta ciudad y brindar un hábitat a diferentes animales que con el tiempo van desapareciendo. Por supuesto, con la ayuda de niños que vienen de las comunidades, porque esta es una ciudad que acoge a muchas personas del campo. También trabajar con la violencia a las mujeres y niñas, ya que en Bolivia es el tercer país en el mundo con más tasa de feminicidios. Y cabe recalcar que las mismas señoras que ven en el mercado y vecinas sufren de la injusticia del machismo, arraigado desde tiempos antiguos. Me incluyo porque a mí me ha pasado y vengo de esa triste realidad. También tengo la idea de armar un grupo de scouts niñas indígenas para enseñarles el liderazgo, cuidado de la naturaleza, importancia de la biodiversidad, reciclaje de la basura, ya que en las laderas de la ciudad existe muchísima basura. Fomentar la educación equitativa, conservación de la cultura que corre por sus venas y no deben sentirse aislados por la sociedad. Todo esto no se logrará solo. Así que he estado consiguiendo asesoramiento de profesionales como ingenieros agrónomos, biólogos, ayuda social, y con la ayuda y entusiasmo de las mujeres indígenas y niños y personas que viven en este lugar con deseos de poder ayudar, además de jóvenes dispuestos a hacer un cambio para el futuro en armonía con la naturaleza y restablecer esa conexión que antes había con la Pachamama. Dios Bagara, que significa gracias en el idioma aymara.
Muchísimas gracias, Pamela, por tu intervención. Los conocimientos que posees y que buscas compartir son definitivamente valiosos y nos brindan una visión más amplia sobre lo que las juventudes ya están haciendo para lograr el futuro que queremos de coexistir armoniosamente en este planeta. Ahora, escucharemos a Emanuel. Cuéntanos, Emanuel, por favor, sobre tu proyecto Greening Burundi.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity and saying about Burundi. My name is Emmanuel because I'm from Burundi. I'm the founder of a no-profit organization. So I'm going to say in French because French is my second language and English is the third. Comme vous voyez, Greening Burundi, c'est l'un des projets donc, qui protège l'environnement ici au Burundi. Et ce qui m'a motivé à pouvoir débuter cette activité ici au Burundi, c'est que depuis mon enfance, j'aimais la nature. Mais quand j'ai grandi, j'ai vu une destruction massive de la nature avec des impacts négatifs ici au Burundi. La couverture forestière dans les années 1990, c'était plus de 56%, mais en 2018, ce n'est que 5,6%. Vous voyez qu'il y a donc une destruction de la couverture forestière ici au Burundi. Et à base de cette déforestation qui est existante ici au Burundi, le Burundi a subi des difficultés majeures liées au changement climatique, comme l'érosion du sol, donc l'infertilité du sol. C'est dans ce cas, plus de 80% de la population burundaise sont des agriculteurs. C'est-à-dire que les Burundais vivent grâce à l'agriculture. Mais s'il y a une destruction du sol, l'érosion du sol, l'infertilité, et la pauvreté a augmenté. Et aussi, une production agricole est devenue insuffisante. Dans son cas, il y avait beaucoup de cas de malnutrition au sein de la communauté. Après avoir constaté tout ça, ces défis majeurs liés à la déforestation, au changement climatique existant ici au Burundi, j'ai pensé à pouvoir contribuer positivement au sein de ma communauté et mon pays. Et j'ai lancé Greening Burundi en 2019, donc comme une solution durable. Ces activités climatiques ont débuté par la mise en place des pépinières d'arbres. Et tous ces arbres ont déjà planté. C'est environ, actuellement, j'ai déjà planté environ 867 000 arbres et jusqu'aujourd'hui, depuis 2018, avec ces jeunes volontaires qui travaillent ensemble avec moi parce que j'avais essayé d'impliquer donc les jeunes à pouvoir contribuer et lutter contre ces changements climatiques existants. Et donc, la plantation, nous connaissons que l'arbre est une solution naturelle climatique, mais planter ne suffit pas. J'avais mis en place donc les programmes éducatifs donc pour inspirer les jeunes, inspirer la communauté à prendre des mesures adéquates préservant donc l'environnement. Et j'ai mis en place donc les clubs. Et aussi, j'ai mis en place le programme que j'ai dit Green Fast Day. C'est un programme qui rassemble donc la population, les jeunes de la communauté pour étudier, échanger les idées innovantes en rapport avec la préservation de l'environnement. Et à base de cela, j'avais mis en place donc le moyen efficace pour lutter contre donc les déchets et lutter contre la pollution environnementale. Donc, ces déchets-là, on fabrique donc les charbons bio et la communauté utilise ces charbons-là donc pour la cuisson et cela prévient donc la population à pouvoir couper ces arbres déjà plantés. C'est comme ça, pour pouvoir contribuer positivement, on pense aux idées innovantes, préserver ce qu'on est en train de faire. Parce que, étant comme un jeune, contribuer pour la préservation de la nature, c'est préparer notre avenir durable, et aussi notre meilleure vie. J'avais donc essayé d'impliquer la communauté, impliquer les enfants, impliquer les jeunes à prendre des mesures efficaces et lutter contre le changement climatique. Et actuellement, je viens de mettre en place donc, un programme encourageant chaque famille de planter au moins 1 hectare des arbres donc, pour augmenter cette couverture forestière détruite. C'est comme ça que Greening Burundi est en train de contribuer positivement parce que nous voulons un Burundi vert, un Burundi exempt du changement climatique. Merci.
Muchísimas gracias, Emanuel. Tu historia nos inspira muchísimo, particularmente por mostrar el gran impacto que las juventudes tienen al implementar soluciones reales para la crisis civilizatoria a la que nos enfrentamos. Quiero expresar mi agradecimiento a Pamela y Emanuel y a todos ustedes, jóvenes de todo el mundo, por la fuerza y congruencia con la que viven cada día para reparar los daños que hemos heredado y para dejar un mundo mejor a las generaciones futuras de todas las especies. Dicho esto, paso la voz a mi colega Esteban Ramírez para el bloque de conclusiones. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, compañera Amelia. Bueno, yo soy Esteban Ramírez de la Red Global de Jóvenes por la Biodiversidad y bueno, vamos a proceder a las conclusiones de este evento. Bueno, primeramente agradecer a todos los panelistas y a todas las expertas y expertos que nos han acompañado en el transcurso de esta mañana o de esta tarde, dependiendo desde dónde nos estén acompañando. Y bueno, en general, las preocupaciones de todas las expertas y expertos, tanto del panel senior como del panel de jóvenes, coinciden en muchas cosas. Todos estamos preocupados por tener parámetros claros sobre la aplicación de estas soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Coincidimos en que los ecosistemas deben ser considerados también parte de la vida humana, que nosotros no podemos contemplar a la naturaleza sin contemplar que somos parte de ella, ¿no? Y que no solamente debemos cuidarla y preservarla, sino que también debemos de cuidar la cultura, las tradiciones y el conocimiento que ha sido generado a través de nuestra convivencia dentro de la naturaleza. También las recomendaciones de cada una de las expertas y expertos se van hilvanando de una manera pues muy hacia el mismo sentido. Todos queremos que se tengan parámetros claros, queremos que se haga con justicia social y pues estamos también muy al pendiente de las negociaciones que se llevan a cabo por medio de los tomadores de decisiones, y también todos coincidimos en que toda la sociedad debe estar empujando por pedir justamente este tipo de decisiones que favorezcan la transformación de nuestra realidad, sobre todo de la juventud. Los jóvenes que estamos aquí buscamos justamente ocupar esos espacios de diálogo para que las cosas se hagan de forma correcta, de la mejor manera, y por eso somos jóvenes líderes en la aplicación y en la persecución de estas soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, y pues que todo se haga con un enfoque basado en ecosistemas. Bien, ahora pues vamos a presentar las representantes del gobierno que nos acompañan hoy de este evento organizado por el gobierno de Canadá en conjunto con el gobierno de México. Y primeramente les voy a presentar a Camila Cepeda. Camila Cepeda es la directora general de temas globales de la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores del gobierno mexicano. Ella es encargada de promover, orientar y coordinar la posición de México en foros multilaterales en temas transversales como medio ambiente y recursos naturales, cambio climático, la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible, el financiamiento para el desarrollo, seguridad alimentaria, entre otros. La directora Cepeda es el punto focal de México para la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático y la Convención sobre Diversidad Biológica. También tenemos a la embajadora Patricia Fuller. Patricia Fuller es la embajadora por el cambio climático de Canadá. El mandato de la embajadora se centra en impulsar la acción sobre cambio climático mediante la creación de asociaciones internacionales y la promoción de tecnologías canadienses limpias. La embajadora Fuller ha representado a Canadá en nombre del ministro Wilkinson en la Comisión Global de Adaptación y colidera junto con el gobierno mexicano la Comisión de la Ruta de Acción en Soluciones Basadas en la Naturaleza. Entonces, les agradecemos mucho su presencia. Cedemos la palabra a la directora Camila Cepeda, por favor.
Muchísimas gracias, Esteban, y muchísimas gracias a nombre del Gobierno de México por esta gran, activa e inspiradora evento. Hemos estado acompañando durante las 2 horas y media el trabajo y que han estado haciendo y las participaciones. Hemos tomado nota, pues muchas de las inquietudes que nos han externado desde el sector académico, las y los jóvenes que han participado, y sin duda pues esto nutrirá todo el trabajo que estamos haciendo conjuntamente Canadá y México en el marco de la Comisión Global de Adaptación para fortalecer este enfoque de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, en las políticas climáticas de adaptación. Y algo muy importante que hemos notado es que pues va a ser fundamental contar con procesos inclusivos en todas estas acciones de adaptación, ¿no? Ya hemos escuchado particularmente, por ejemplo, de Mini, en el que si estamos hablando que los pueblos indígenas pues representan ahora el bastión de defensa de la naturaleza, pues es fundamental que puedan formar parte de toda la toma de decisiones y que no sea simplemente pues una voz más, ¿no? Que sean una voz activa. Por ello es que dentro, en el marco de esta track que tenemos de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, organizamos el diálogo de pueblos indígenas, en el que se evidenció esta necesidad de tener estrategias para pues difundir la importancia de trabajar en conservación y restauración, y también en que la niñez y juventud participen. Estos resultados del diálogo de pueblos indígenas va a ser fundamental porque queremos llevarlo todo esto a las negociaciones que tenemos actualmente, y no solo en temas de cambio climático, sino también en las negociaciones actuales de biodiversidad y en las negociaciones de desertificación, ¿no? Para traer pues este tema a la mesa de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, ¿no? Bueno, aquí no quiero mencionar solamente a los temas indígenas, sino que pues el foro de juventud en el que estamos y viendo pues su participación tan activa, es pedirles que sigan pues exigiendo, que sigan mostrando, manifestándose su interés en todos los desafíos ambientales que tenemos hacia adelante, ¿no? Y aquí, por ejemplo, esta participación tan activa sí genera cambios, y un gran ejemplo que tenemos en la región de América Latina y el Caribe es el Acuerdo de Escazú. El Acuerdo de Escazú que busca la participación activa en las defensas de derechos humanos de todos los ciudadanos, que puedan ser activos y que se pueda defender sus derechos, va a finalmente entrar en vigor mañana con Argentina y México, que ya depositan este instrumento, ¿no? Y que pues va a ser fundamental porque es un acuerdo vinculante, que es un tratado inédito de esta naturaleza en la región y en el mundo, ¿no? Y que pues la verdad esto ha sido un gran logro en buena medida por todo el impulso de sociedad civil y por el impulso de movimientos juveniles, ¿no? Entonces, que vean que pues sus exigencias sí pueden tener resultados y sí hay una vía hacia adelante. En todo este proceso, pues me alegra muchísimo ver que ya hay pues una organización de redes internacionales de jóvenes, como es el Youth for Nature y Given, en nuestro caso con México, en todas estas temáticas tan relevantes que es cambio climático y biodiversidad. Y para el gobierno de México pues es muy importante esta presencia de representantes juveniles en todos los foros internacionales y que nos acompañan también como miembros oficiales de las delegaciones que vamos negociando pues, en todos estos temas que están actualmente en discusión. Entonces, pues nos gusta mucho que puedan participar, que se involucren. Este año tenemos todo el marco de las negociaciones en la Agenda de Biodiversidad post-2020. Finalmente, esperemos que tengamos la cumbre de cambio climático de Glasgow a finales de año, en las que, bueno, los invitamos a formar parte de este proceso. Y bueno, ahora el 25 de enero tenemos esta cumbre de adaptación al clima, en el que creemos que es solo el inicio de lo que tenemos en el tema de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, ¿no? Y que buscamos pues seguirlo impulsando hacia adelante. Muchísimas gracias por todo su trabajo y sigamos adelante. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, directora Cepeda. Ahora cedemos la palabra a la embajadora Fuller.
Muchas gracias, Esteban. Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm joining you from Vancouver, which is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam Nation. I would like to congratulate Youth for Nature and Global Youth Biodiversity Network for your leadership in organizing this wonderful event that the Government of Canada has been very pleased to be able to support. And I'm so very glad that I've had this opportunity to listen and learn from all that you have had to say during these 2 hours. And I feel that you have reminded us that we have to aim higher in our work on climate action, and we have to ensure that it is advancing equity, inclusion, and sustainability. So this event is the final in the series of initiatives that Canada and Mexico have come together to lead through the action track for nature-based solutions as part of the Global Commission on Adaptation. And the Global Commission will culminate in the summit on Monday. And through this action track on nature-based solutions, we've worked to raise awareness of the incredible importance and potential of nature and of nature-based solutions for building resilience to the impacts of climate change. And this work has included certainly a very important element, as Camilla has mentioned, of hearing from Indigenous peoples who have unique rights and hold critically important knowledge of the natural world that has been acquired over millennia of stewardship. We have also worked to see how financing for investment in nature and for nature-based solutions can be increased. And we've explored opportunities for collaboration between public and private sectors and among cities, and as we're doing today, among generations. Today's discussion has made clear that youth are already hard at work on how we can build resilience to climate change through caring and restoring nature. And all of the ideas and energy and ambition that youth bring to this challenge. I have heard you say that it's important to put effort into understanding what nature-based solutions really mean. And in the input we got from the audience, we heard about what nature means, and really it means everything. It means life, it means vida. And we have to be sincere about the goals of nature-based solutions. Also very much take to heart the messages we heard about how the rights of Indigenous communities and local communities must be fully recognized, and that youth have a role to play in calling out projects that don't bring benefits for local communities and for adaptation. And the importance of amplifying the voices of different actors and bringing equity to these processes. And it was wonderful to hear about the work that is already going on, for example, with young farmers in Africa. Emmanuel and Pamela, your stories were very inspiring. Pamela, te felicito por tu liderazgo en la forestación en tu comunidad. Emmanuel, aussi, je te félicite pour ton travail pour augmenter la couverture forestière en Burundi et d'impliquer les jeunes en la plantation des arbres. Very inspiring to hear your stories. So to conclude, at the summit on Monday, where I hope you will be all able to participate, a global youth call to action will be launched, as has been mentioned here. And I'm very pleased that through work like this and the work of your organizations, that your voices will be brought to this summit. And like to thank again Youth for Nature and the Global Youth Biodiversity Network for bringing us together today. I hope to see you or be with you on Monday at the summit. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup.
Muchas gracias, embajadora. Y justamente, como ambas han mencionado, este evento forma parte de varios eventos que se han dado en cara a el Climate Adaptation Summit, que se está realizando pues en estos días. Justamente el día de mañana, 22 de enero, está el Global Youth Call to Action, donde jóvenes de todo el mundo justamente están alzando la voz, donde se está expresando que debemos de aprovechar este momento de pandemia, como decía por ahí Mirna, que pues justamente esta crisis se ha dado por la pérdida de biodiversidad, por la pérdida de ecosistemas. Entonces debemos aprovechar justamente esta crisis y convertirlo en una oportunidad de tomar acción por el cambio climático, ¿no? Y bueno, el día 25 de enero se va a llevar a cabo este segmento de alto nivel, donde va a haber tomadores de decisiones prioritarios para las decisiones en torno al cambio climático. Y el 26 de enero se va a llevar a cabo el Youth Leadership Anchoring Event. Además, bueno, y después se va a proceder a finalizar esa cumbre de adaptación en cambio climático. Bueno, ahora pasaremos a una actividad de cierre. Agradecemos a todas las personas que nos han acompañado hasta el final. Se va a estar compartiendo otro AHA Slides que pueden encontrar aquí en el chat. Y bueno, pues es primeramente sobre mencionar una cosa que aprendiste el día de hoy. Vemos que hay gente aquí que aprendió qué son las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, cuáles son sus implicaciones, de qué tenemos que preocuparnos al hablar sobre soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Aprendimos también la importancia de manejar todo este vocabulario, como también nos mencionaban una panelista. Es muy importante en las negociaciones los pequeños términos. Conocimos también, aprendimos sobre las preocupaciones que hay. Ok. Y bueno, pues en general los retos y las diferencias entre el uso de todo esto en lo político, pero a la hora en términos de policy y política. Muy bien, muchas gracias. Y pues solamente me queda decirles como conclusión final que todos los que nos hemos reunido aquí somos jóvenes líderes, somos jóvenes que ya hemos demostrado trabajo y que no solamente estamos alzando la voz, sino que estamos abriendo este camino para dar el ejemplo de todo lo que queremos aplicar en soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y en enfoques basados en ecosistemas. Muchas gracias.